Shopify grows your business no matter how far or big you grow. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Whether you're selling your fans' next favorite shirt or an exclusive piece of podcast merch, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Allbirds, Rothy's, Brooklinen, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in.
Feel your max with Brooks Running and the all-new Ghost Max 2. They're the shoes you deserve, designed to streamline your stride and help protect your body. Treat yourself to feel-good landings on an ultra-high stack of super comfy nitrogen-infused cushion that takes the edge off every step, every day. The Brooks Ghost Max 2. You know, technically, they're a form of self-care. Brooks, let's run there. Head to brooksrunning.com to learn more.
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
I didn't believe his threat. It was just a tactic to try to get me to come outside. That's what still gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different.
I hope I never, ever see either of these two man-boys again, as I will either become paralyzed in terror or completely lose my marbles.
From Killer Podcasts. True tales of horror, bizarre happenings, unexplainable events. This is Disturbed. Hello, and welcome back to the show. This week, we're bringing you 4 stories that will challenge your faith in humanity. Your siblings, your parents, your best friend, your boyfriend, everyone that you trust is capable of so much evil. Can you trust them? Because if you can't, they're the last people you want coming for you. Sit back, listen closely, and dive into the horror. First, a story narrated by our own Elizabeth Flood from Reddit user Awakening Mystics. Can a cult be just 2 people?
It has been about 2.5 years since I initiated abrupt no contact with a man who went by Sir. My then boyfriend Alan considered him his father and even moved into his house. Alan essentially fed me to Sir for 3 years. Sir manipulated me to the point that I was isolated from my family, believed that I'd be cursed if I had any photographic evidence of him, and thought that all good things in my life were because of him. This is the tip of the iceberg. It was awful. At the time, I never told anyone what was going on. I eventually broke up with Alan and escaped from Sir, and in retaliation, Sir said he was going to come to my workplace with Alan and tell my boss that my ex had dumped me because, according to Sir, I was having an affair with a crew member. I was in management at the time, and Sir was aware that management and crew were not allowed to date. The threat of using this made-up story against me in my workplace was terrifying. Sir had such a chokehold on me that I spent years trying to win the lottery for him by searching for patterns in hundreds of sheets of California lottery numbers. He'd yell at me, both over the phone and in person, telling me that if I didn't cooperate, I'd be desolate, with no good fortune or opportunity in life. He promised that by winning the lottery for him, we'd all be happy and successful. We'd compare lottery number sheets to Florida and Georgia. He did anything he could to get me to believe that there was a fixed formula to win the lottery. His tactics ranged from throwing tantrums to icing me out for days to punish me for not being motivated or focused enough on the number formulas. My ex, Alan, worked 2 jobs, sometimes from 4 a.m. to 11 p.m., but both of these grown men used me for my money and my time. Sir was unemployed in his mid-50s. In fact, he'd never had a job before because he got too sick absorbing other people's energy. He occasionally got leprosy, which made him stay in his room for days at a time. I never saw evidence of this supposed disease. He picked at dry skin on his hands, but that's it. Sir made me sign him up for food stamps and take out a personal loan. He told me to lie to the bank and say it was for renovating my parents' home. He asked me for $20,000, and by an absolute miracle, I was denied the full amount and only given $5,000. He paid me back with 2 checks, each for $115, and never the remainder of the loan. He told me I could only deposit these checks once he gave me permission. I was about 28 or 29 at this time, intelligent but trusting of others, with big dreams and lots of spunk. I don't use the word manipulate lightly. When I say it, I mean it. Now that I'm out of the situation, I can recognize that I was 100% coerced by religion and spiritual threats. Alan and Sir told me that if I didn't support them, I would be jinxed. They told me stories of how Sir predicted the injury of their friend's face, the pregnancy of another friend, and tons of other occurrences. I remember one summer when Sir sat in his big, creepy, inherited house full of mirrors and antiques, while Alan and I painted his entire patio in 85-degree heat. We often trimmed the bushes and watered the lawn while he stood over us, watching. He made us chop the pieces of bushes into smaller pieces using very dull shears, and when we chopped garlic, we had to use his dull knives, not the sharp ones, because that was better. He micromanaged absolutely everything, and I learned the hard way not to question his extremely particular preferences. Sir would call me over 20 times a day from a no-caller ID number to make sure I was home, either working on the lottery or on his ghost repellent business, which was actually just bottles of ammonia with labels that he made me design, print, hand cut, hand tie, everything. I worked crazy hours and was told to sleep with my phone ringer on loud, and Sir would take every opportunity to call or text me when I'd only had 3 or 4 hours of sleep. He'd tell me to get up and work on the lottery because the system has changed and I need to explain it to you. But the system changed daily. Every single day. He was convinced there was a solvable formula and he'd get me to crack it. If there is, I could never find it. I was forbidden from not answering his phone calls, even if I was using my GPS to drive to an unknown place at night. To him, ignoring was the highest form of disrespect. If we ever showed disrespect, he'd cut us out for a day or 2, scream at us, and get us to realize how absolutely awful we were to him. Anytime he got mad, one of his eyes would bulge and twitch. One year, it was Alan's birthday, and we went out to eat someplace nice, just the 2 of us. Sir was so offended that we went to dinner without him, yelling, "After everything I do for you? Fine, you're on your own. Fuck you." He'd call Alan while he was at my house to tell him to come home. Alan and I were not allowed to be physically intimate because bad things would happen to Sir if we were. We couldn't have friends because too many invisible forces were out there trying to curse and bring Sir and Alan down. I didn't even attend my close friend's wedding because Sir had a feeling that something like a shooting was going to happen. Alan would get so angry with Sir's control that he developed a drinking problem. Once, Alan even punched dents into his own car ceiling out of frustration. But then, later that very night, he called me to explain that he was actually so grateful that Sir was so insanely strict with him because he sees things I can't, and he's protecting us. We need to be more thankful. Alan was sometimes forced to sleep in his car across the street from Sir's house because of petty occurrences like locking the garage door by accident. "Do not disrespect my people like that," he was told. I spent all my drives to their house and back shaking in fear, wishing I could exist in a dimension other than this one. I believed that if I died, Sir and his people would curse me for an eternity, but being alive felt like a curse in itself. I was in agony, total agony. I can't describe it any other way. One time, Alan told me in front of Sir to kiss Sir on the cheek for good luck. Sir looked at me, waiting for it, and I just felt like throwing up, so I didn't. In fact, I always felt like throwing up around him. Alan kissed him on the mouth once, and when I asked him why he was okay with that, he said, "What? Oh, people in Europe do that with their dads." But Sir wasn't even his dad. He was a tarot card reader whom Alan's mom and her friends went to, looking for predictions. Whenever my mom asked Alan about his family, he'd immediately change the subject. Alan was extremely charismatic and handsome, but now I can see it was all a facade. He knew how to get what he wanted out of people. His boss and coworkers once even gathered their hard-earned cash for him as a kind gesture, which made me cry tears of joy. But Alan just gave the money to Sir. Alan had to make sure not to mention any work bonuses to Sir, because he'd get upset if he didn't give them to him. Alan even had cuts on his arm a few times, which he said were caused by Sir. But Alan believed he deserved this treatment. Sadly, Alan was physically abused by his mother as a child, so that adds another layer to this. Alan and Sir insisted that Sir's saliva was healing and medicinal and made wounds heal faster than they ever could otherwise. They both told me he had the ability to lose 40 pounds in 1 week, and that Alan had seen it happen. Yet his diet was comprised of Coke, microwaved meals, fast food, rocket pops, and chicken tacos. Whenever we went out to eat, Alan and I had to shell out $50 each because he'd order drinks, sides, entrees, dessert, everything. His favorite restaurant was P.F. Chang's. He refused to drink water unless it was Hint brand flavored water, but he rarely even drank that. He spent his days binge eating snacks, yelling at service providers over the phone, and calling his female friends to gossip. He got mad when his sweet elderly friend Sandra's husband wouldn't lend him money because he knew they had savings. Sir had a camera pointed at his brother's house across the street, and any time he left the room, he'd make me stare at the monitor so I could alert him if his brother walked outside of his house for any reason. He made voodoo dolls of his brother's sons and put curses on them. Alan had a coworker he disliked, so Sir put a photo of her face in a bowl of ammonia, and the two of them performed a ritual, asking to be rid of her. She was fired the next day. One of the last things Sir said to me over the phone before I cut him out of my life was this:
"If you say anything bad about me, I'm going to fucking skin you alive."
I will never forget that. I hope I never, ever see either of these two man-boys again, as I will either become paralyzed in terror or completely lose my marbles. I want my money back, but mostly I want justice for the agony they put me through. What should have seemed like a bunch of silly lies was presented to me in such a precise and calculated way that it overrode any sense of logic or common sense for me. In fact, it was so intentional and calculated that even though I always felt sick to my stomach and skeptical, I was pulled in regardless. Alan would always reassure me, I know it sounds absolutely crazy, but you have to trust me. I know this story is very long, but telling it is therapeutic. I reached out to one guy they used to give guidance to who also went no contact with them, but he only read my message and didn't reply. My guess is he thinks Sir is making me message him. I don't know why all this happened to me, or whether they found new victims after I left. All I know is I'm glad to be rid of them.
Our next story is told by Catarina Sveta about a peeping Tom who's too close for comfort.
When I was a kid, my parents bought the perfect house in the perfect area, and my grandparents lived right across the street from us. There was only one problem. There was an older man who also wanted to buy our house, but since my parents got to it first, he had to settle for the smaller house next door. He was so jealous of us that he took every opportunity he could to cause us trouble. I'm not sure if he was trying to drive us away or just taking his revenge. He scratched our car, poisoned our apple trees, blew up a firework near me, which caused me to temporarily go deaf in one ear when I was 4. All kinds of things. I remember my dad often called us from work to tell us not to be alone at home, and we'd have to go stay at Grandma's. The neighbor's son was a judge in our city, so anytime we went to court, we lost. Even when we brought in footage recorded on our security camera, we still lost the case. When I was little, I think around 6 or 7, I frequently had nightmares about seeing a face outside of our bathroom window. The window is above our bathtub. It's high enough that no one can see in unless they climb the roof of our shed, which is underneath the bathroom window in our garden. Coincidentally, the shed is directly next to a fence that separates our garden from the neighbors. I still vividly remember these dreams. I used to have them pretty much every other night. I never told my parents when I was little because we didn't really talk about what was going on in our lives, so I didn't really share anything that was happening to me. I grew up thinking these dreams had no basis in reality. I did mention them to my therapist last year because we were discussing some personal problems, and I felt like this was kind of connected. After coming home, my mom asked me what I talked about with my therapist, so I finally shared that I used to have such dreams. She said that when I was little, I actually told her I saw our neighbor on our shed's roof. I don't remember this, but she said I mentioned it several times. Even my friend told her they saw him there when they came over to our house, and it creeped them out. Apparently, I never mentioned him watching me shower. But after she told me that, it really clicked for me, and it was as if I suddenly remembered that. Yeah, I do think he was the cause of my nightmares. It would make sense. As an adult, it never occurred to me that these dreams really happened. And this realization made my skin crawl. Another unnerving incident happened when I was 9 or 10. I stepped onto the balcony one evening to call my cat home, but stopped when I saw a person standing in the middle of our garden. It was already dark out, so I couldn't tell who it was. I waited to see what he would do, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring blankly ahead. Eventually, I called out, "Dad?" And the person looked up at me. At that moment, even in the darkness, I could tell it was someone else. I ran downstairs and found my dad in the living room and told him what I'd seen. He went outside in the garden and no one was there. I went back up to the balcony, looked outside again, and noticed my neighbor's back door closing. Within a few days, all of our grass turned brown, and we found out it had been poisoned. I remember being scared to leave my house when I was young. This neighbor died when I was around 16, and as much as I don't wish death on anyone, I couldn't help feeling relieved.
You're listening to Disturbed. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
When you protect your corn and soy crops with Miravis Neem fungicide, you'll start seeing a lot more than just cleaner and greener fields. You'll get longer-lasting disease control, better plant health benefits, less plant stress, higher potential yield, and increased ROI potential. Ask your Syngenta retailer about Miravis Neo and start seeing more green in your fields, on your yield monitor, and in your wallet. Always read and follow label instructions.
Welcome back to the podcast. This next story comes from a listener submission. If you have a truly terrifying tale of your own, send it our way and we might put it on the show. Narrated by Kat Carter, the worst boyfriend of all time.
I've been working as a board-certified psychiatric registered nurse for almost 20 years. In the early 2010s, I was working in an inpatient mental health unit in a hospital along the mid-Atlantic coast of the U.S. During that time, a young man named Greg admitted himself voluntarily and was assigned to my care team. Greg reported he had been having suicidal thoughts due to his estrangement from his parents and siblings. Greg shared that he'd experienced a variety of abuses at the hands of family members and, in turn, committed acts of sexual assault against a young cousin. The proper channels of reporting had been completed, but for reasons I'm unaware of, he never faced consequences for those acts of abuse. Unfortunately, Greg was never willing to sign a release of information for his family, so we couldn't obtain any collateral information. That being said, Greg presented as fully remorseful for his past behaviors. He said he was now experiencing auditory hallucinations, commanding him to harm himself due to the guilt he felt about his actions. Greg was polite, insightful, and wholly invested in inpatient treatment programming, but I couldn't shake the feeling deep in my gut that there was something off about this guy. He was very charming and quickly had most of the other patients eating out of his hands and following him around the unit like puppies. Ask any psych nurse you meet and they'll tell you that is a red flag. Still, Greg was a Gold Star patient, and compared to the high acuity of other folks admitted to the unit, he was the least of our behavioral management concerns. At the start of his admission, Greg shared that he was residing with his very supportive 22-year-old girlfriend, Maddie, and her mother, Moira. Greg identified Maddie and Moira as his primary supports and stated that he didn't know what he would do without them. He had frequent, pleasant visits with both of them, and, they clearly loved him very much. They often expressed to our staff their eagerness to have him home with them again. After a few weeks of treatment, Greg reported that his suicidal ideations were resolving and he felt ready for discharge. We pulled together a robust discharge plan and scheduled an exit meeting for him with Maddie and her mom. I was Greg's primary nurse during his stay, so I was the one to facilitate the discharge meeting. Greg Maddie and Moira were so happy to be reuniting, and as the meeting wrapped, they excitedly stated they were heading out to lunch to celebrate. All was well and good in their world. 2 weeks later, I was getting myself ready for work one day with the local news playing on my TV in the background. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Greg's face pop up on the screen. I whipped around and turned my full attention to the broadcast. The news anchor reported that an active manhunt was on for a local 23-year-old man accused of murdering his girlfriend and her mother. It turns out that while Moira was out of the house, Greg ambushed poor sweet Maddie in her bedroom and strangled her to death with a belt. After she passed, he sexually assaulted her body. Greg then lay in wait for several hours until Moira returned home. He blindsided her, beat her to death with a hammer, and assaulted her corpse the same way he had done to her daughter. Then he rolled up her body in a carpet and left her remains on the laundry room floor. Before leaving their home, Greg packed their television, some jewelry, and a hair straightener into Moira's car and drove himself into a neighboring state. He was eventually apprehended in a motel, hiding out with another middle-aged woman and her 20-something niece. These women had been using Maddie and Moira's personal belongings as if they were their own, but were reportedly unaware of the murders. Now, this is sheer speculation on my part, but I wholeheartedly believe Greg would have eventually killed these women as well. It's my conviction that he was a budding serial killer. Greg attempted an insanity defense, but was found fully competent to stand trial, and will now spend the rest of his life in prison, with no chance of parole. I sincerely hope the rest of his days bring him every ounce of misery he deserves.
Our final story is narrated by Kyra Cornett from r/Let's Not Meet. My landlord tried to break in when I was home alone at 16.
When I was about 16, I lived with my dad and my brothers in an old rundown house in the middle of nowhere. We were so isolated that the closest house to us was 2 miles away, where our landlord lived. We didn't actually pay him money for rent. Instead, my brother would do work for him as payment. The landlord never came off as particularly creepy to me, but that could be because I rarely went outside, and when he came over to talk to my dad. And of course, he wouldn't dare to do anything in front of my dad. Then one day, my brothers and dad were out, so I was home alone with just my dog in the yard outside. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2. I heard a noise and looked out my bedroom window to see a car driving up our long driveway. It wasn't my dad's car, so I immediately freaked out. I ran through the house, shutting all the blinds, turning off all the lights, and checking that the doors were locked with deadbolts. It was our landlord. This wasn't the first time he'd come here unexpectedly. It had happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times, he was only there for 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house, then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going crazy and barking. I heard the landlord yell, "Shut up, mutt." I could hear his footsteps walking up to the front door. He tried to open it. Terrified, I text my dad. He was on his way home, but it would take him an hour to get there. The landlord continued walking around our house, trying to open each door and peek into each window. At first, I thought maybe he didn't know I was home alone. Maybe it was just a coincidence that each time he showed up without notice, I happened to be home alone. But then he started calling my name. There was no doubt he knew I was by myself. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly crept through the house following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to make out what he was saying. That's when he yelled something I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn the house down, but I'll let you out first." I didn't believe his threat. It was just a tactic to try to get me to come outside. That's what still gets me. I know exactly what would have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes, maybe an hour. He finally left before my dad came home. I told my dad everything, and the landlord actually evicted us not long after. I still don't know how our landlord knew exactly when I was home alone and when to leave before my dad returned. The memory of this event still keeps me up at night sometimes.
Want more Disturbed? Check out our Patreon for member-exclusive content, early merch access, and other cool perks. I'm your host, Doug Bailey, and this has been Disturbed, a production of Killer Podcasts and part of the Evergreen Network. For more paranormal and true crime shows, visit killerpodcasts.com. Follow our social channels at Disturbed Podcast on Instagram or Disturbed_pod on Twitter. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing and reviewing on your favorite listening platform. Share your own true horror story at disturbedpodcast.com. Music by Epidemic Sound and by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Our producers are Noah Fouts and Elizabeth Flood. Our audio engineer is Nathan Corson. Executive producers Bridget Coyne and Gerardo Orlando. Until next time, stay safe out there.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly